guys, it's Sarah, and today I wanted to share with you some books that I personally think would be really great gifts for readers in your life if these are books that they have not read yet. And I'm doing book specific because I'm going to do different genres. I'm going to give you some different genres and give you two books from those genres that I have personally read and given 5 stars and highly recommend to a lot of people if people are looking for recommendations. And I think that these are books that could be good for pretty much anybody. There might be a couple here and there where there's going to be maybe depending on the person, they have to kind of be willing to go to some dark places. But if that's something that they enjoy, then these books would be good for them. But I will have an alternate for each one if that's something that is going to be an issue. So different genres, different recommendations. Okay, so let's start with general fiction. The first one I would definitely recommend is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This book is also kind of technically historical fiction. It gets lumped into historical fiction a lot. I still think it's a little bit more, it's set in the 50s. So 50s and 60s, but I don't know. I have a hard time really calling it historical fiction. It seems a little bit too modern to me for historical, but it is set in the 50s and 60s, and it follows a woman in STEM. And during that time frame, women were pretty much expected to either stay home and have kids and raise the kids and be a homemaker, or if they are working, they were secretaries. And not many other options. And so her working as a scientist, actually working in a lab as a scientist, was very rare and very difficult for her because she was never taken seriously. If she would walk into a room, into another lab to look for something or to talk to a colleague or to figure something out, people would always assume that she's a secretary. And she's like, no, I have a lab coat on. I'm clearly a scientist. And so she really, really struggled. She had a lot of really toxic men in her environment. And so it was a big struggle for her. She ends up making the most of it with an opportunity that she can actually reach out to other women on a big global scale and just interact with them in that way and kind of shine a different light on women in the workplace. And it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. This is one that I listened to on audiobook, and I don't have a physical copy yet, but I'm thinking I might get the Barnes & Noble exclusive copy because number one, it has beautiful sprayed blue edges. They are gorgeous. And it's also the book of the year for Barnes & Noble. This is the one book of the entire year that won the book of the year. And so I might end up picking that one up from work. So we'll see. But I absolutely love this one and I recommend it all the time. Okay, another general fiction that I would like to recommend is Razor Blade Tears by S.A. Cosby. And this is one of the ones that if you're going to give this book to somebody, they have to be okay with a lot of cursing. They have to be okay with a lot of difficult racism talks because that is in here. And they have to be okay with some LGBTQIA+ with pushback from that. And there's a lot of violence, a lot of graphic violence in this book. So if you have a book lover in your life who's willing to read stuff like that, this is going to be the book for them. This follows 2 men who are both convicted felons. They have both served jail time. And they actually end up coming together because their sons who were married were killed. And very much looks like a hate crime against them. And so they are coming together because the investigation for their deaths are really going cold. And it just seems like the police aren't really doing all that much. So they're trying to take matters into their own hands. And they have some skills because they're both convicted felons. So they know how to do things. They know how to make things disappear. They know how to make people disappear. So they are setting out to just get justice for their sons is what they're doing. And there's a lot of talk about social class and social status and, obviously race and all this kind of stuff. So it was fantastic. I absolutely love this book, but it is pretty violent. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're going to give it as a gift. Okay, let's go to nonfiction. So I'm going to have one true crime and then one that is just like a current events type of book. So my true crime book is the best true crime I've ever read, and that is The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. This follows Ted Bundy, and not only him, but Anne Rule's personal relationship with him. They were friends. She worked with him for a time. They built up a friendship and had that friendship for a very long time. Even when he was killing and she was, things were starting to come to light and starting to be on the news and things are starting to happen with him and he's starting to be noticed. And she struggled a lot with, believing that he was capable of this because it didn't seem like the type of person that she knew. He even contacted her after he was arrested from jail. And so it was a whole thing. It was really interesting to get that take on him and like that different side of all the stuff that was happening in the media. And when I read this, I thought I knew what Ted Bundy had done. I was not ready, you guys. I knew the very, very scratch of the surface of what he did. I did not know a lot of the details. I did not know how far back it went. I did not know a lot of it. And I did not know just how bad he was and how brutal and what he did to these women. My mouth was hanging open. I was like, he really was a monster. Man. And then the fact that he would turn on the charm. And let's face it, he was handsome, which he obviously used to his advantage. And it's just so fascinating to me. But the personal perspective on him and the whole case coming from Anne Rule was really, really interesting. And that just took it to a whole nother level for me. And I just absolutely loved it. It's 100% one of the best nonfictions I've ever read. And then the other one is also one of the best nonfictions I've ever read, if not the best, and that's The Only Plane in the Sky. And this is by Garrett M. Granth. This is an oral history of 9/11, the events leading up to the terror attack on the U.S. And this one is just so hard to put into words. It's definitely the most emotional book I've ever read. I sobbed my way through this book and I learned things. I learned things about different aspects of it that I had never known before. You are going to be reading transcripts from that day. You're going to be reading conversations between air traffic control towers and trying to ground all these planes because nobody has any idea what's going on. You're going to see how the air traffic controllers who were in charge of those hijacked planes at the time were reacting and trying to figure out what's going on. You are going to read phone calls from the airplanes. And it just goes through the entire day with different accounts from people. I highly also recommend the audiobook for this one. Gifting an audiobook is a little bit more difficult, but you can also recommend to anyone that you give this to that if you can get a hold of the audiobook, definitely try to do that because it took it to a whole nother level for me. Some of the narration is done by the actual people involved and some of them are voice actors, but man, it's very, very emotional, but also very important. And definitely one. I'm going to say it's not the best nonfiction book I've ever read. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. But those are the two best nonfictions I've ever read. Okay, let's talk about mystery thrillers. We're going to do a backlist, and then we're going to do one that was released this year. So the backlist one is going to be Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. To me, this is her best book. Have I read all of her books yet? No, I have not read her two most recent. But I absolutely loved Behind Closed Doors. This one follows a married couple who are seemingly perfect on the outside, but behind closed doors, things are very, very different. And you see why. You see what's going on. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but it all just really starts to unravel. And it was very intense and just gave me all sorts of feelings. And I just absolutely love that book. That is one of my favorite mystery thrillers of all time. And then the one that was released this year is my current favorite book of the year. Don't know if anything will knock it off, to be honest, but that is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This is another one that there's some warnings actually in the front of the book that you can look at if you pick it up. And this one definitely goes to dark places as well. And there are some really difficult scenes to read in this book. It gets very intense. This follows a woman who is going back to her college town because one of her best friends from college is found dead. She does not believe that her friend took her own life. She believes that she was killed. So she is going back to see what she can find out and bring justice to her friend's death. This is reliving a whole lot of things for her because when they were in college, they were both part of a sex cult. So we are reliving some of that. We are going back and forth between the present timeline and the past timeline. Both are very difficult and both have their own different sets of challenges. And it was intense. I felt like I was there the way this book was written. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. Definitely one of the best mystery thrillers I've ever read, one of the best books I've ever read. And if you have a reader in your life who you think could handle just some dark things, just some dark stuff, this is the book for them. Okay, let's go to historical fiction. One of my favorites is Lovely War by Julie Berry. I absolutely loved this book. This book is very unique in that it tells two different love stories that are set in World War I. It also flashes forward to World War II. So there's two different time frames in here. The main one is World War I, but we also get some of World War II in there as well. Now, what makes this one unique is that the narrators for this book, the people who are telling these love stories, are Greek gods. Like Athena and Hades is in there, and Ares plays a big part in this. And their scenes are very interesting because they're all together in one room for a very specific reason, and these tales are coming out. And so you're going back and forth between them actually like seeing them interact with each other and then getting the love story, but they're still part of the love story. You can definitely see them inserted in there. It was so cool. I just thought that premise was so interesting and unique, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic and one of my favorite historical fictions by far. So just definitely a different take on historical fiction. And then another historical fiction that I really love is The Huntress by Kate Quinn. I really loved this book. It was written so well, and it was a book that I thought was going to take me a while to get through because sometimes historical fictions can be that way, but I flew through this book. I could not put it down. I thought it was so great. So The Huntress is a woman in World War II who was accused of crimes in Germany. So she was considered one of the most deadly people that had to do with prisoner treatment, if you will. So she was in charge of, Jewish prisoners, and she was very brutal. She ended up escaping. She never paid for her crimes, and she just kind of disappeared. And so we are going back and forth in timelines here again, and seeing what happened back then versus what is happening now, and why this woman is being brought up again, and why she her crimes are starting to be relevant again. And it was really interesting. There are multiple perspectives in here. I loved every single one of them. And one of them was just this great female pilot that was so fantastic. And so I really, really enjoyed that one. So if you have a person in your life who really likes historical fiction, maybe they really like Kate Quinn, like The Alice Network is probably her biggest book. If they have not read The Huntress yet, definitely get this book for them. Okay, let's go over to fantasy. Now, my biggest recommendation for fantasy books is Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. And that is if people already like fantasy and they haven't read it, get into it. If they are brand new to fantasy, get into it. And it's because it just can go both ways, because people who are already reading fantasy and already have kind of a feel for what it's like can easily go into Brandon Sanderson and just get lost in this world and enjoy it. People who have never read fantasy before but want to give it a try, especially epic high fantasy, because that's what this is still such a great place to start because it's very, very approachable. Brandon Sanderson's writing makes it so that you can understand it. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're used to or whatever. He writes in a way that makes it all click in your head. And it's just little details that will be like, oh, that makes sense. Got it. It's not overly complicated, and it's so much fun. His books are so much fun. So Mistborn is a trilogy, and this trilogy is set in a world where the bad guys have already won. So when book 1 starts, they are living in a world where the bad guys are in power. And they're basically keeping the people of this world enslaved. And just everything has kind of gone to ruins, to the point where there's even ash floating in the air. Like the air isn't even clean because everything is so bad there. And the people are treated like slaves. And so we're following this group of people who decide to band together to kind of, try to start like a revolution or to start a resistance to try to overthrow these people and this terrible ruler who is keeping them all down. And there's a lot of the magic system in here is so good because it's based on metals that you ingest. And each metal has a different, can give you a different type of power. Some people can only ingest certain metals. Some people can ingest all of them. And it's really, really, really interesting and so much fun to see the people of this world using these metals this way and how they're able to get them and what it does for them and learning how to use them. And it was just so good and so much fun. So I definitely recommend that for either an established fantasy reader who has not read this series yet or a brand new to fantasy reader. Both are great. And the next one that I want to recommend for fantasy is Malice by John Gwynne. And I feel like John Gwynne can be kind of more of a popular choice, but he's not as popular as Brandon Sanderson or as George R.R. Martin. But his books are so good. They're just so good. And he has a few where you can start. So I'm recommending Malice because that's my favorite. And this one is the start of a 4-book series. And we are following, I feel like it's a little bit Games of Thrones-ish. So if you have someone who really loves Game of Thrones and they haven't read this series yet, I would maybe go there because we are following a big grab for power that's up for grabs. So different leaders in different kingdoms want the power, right? And there's a prophecy. There is an animal companion that I die for. And we're following mainly this young boy. There's multiple perspectives in this book, but we're mainly following this young boy who is coming to terms with a lot of war happening around him and him actually thinking like, I might actually have to go to battle one day because there's not going to be many soldiers left. I might have to be a person who's going to have to go to war and fight for my country and fight for my kingdom. And so you're seeing him deal with that. You're seeing a lot of hate towards him as well for certain reasons. And it's just fantastic, you guys. It's really, really, really good. I flew through the first one, even though it's this big. So I would say if you have a fantasy lover who has not read John Gwynne, get them Malice and see what they think. He also has a newer series that he has started. The first one is called The Shadow of the Gods. I haven't personally read that yet, but I have heard very good things. So that's another place that you can start as well. Okay, science fiction. These are going to be probably very popular choices. So we'll see how this goes if you're looking for a science fiction book. The only problem is I'm not super well versed in science fiction yet. That's something I would like to change next year. But my other favorite book of this year, besides The Last Housewife, is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This book was phenomenal. And you cannot change my mind about that. I absolutely loved this book. The way that Andy Weir weaves in the humor with his science fiction is just everything for me. I absolutely love it. There is sciencey stuff in here that went right over my head, and I did not care. I didn't care. I just kind of skimmed it, and it's fine. And I love the danger he puts in his books. And I love the humor he puts in his books because they definitely go hand in hand, and it's just phenomenal. It really is. We're following a scientist who becomes part of a team that is being sent out into space for a very specific reason. And I don't want to say too much about it because I think, going into it not knowing a whole lot is the way to go. This book opens up with our scientist waking up on a spaceship out in space. There are dead bodies around him, and he has no idea what his name even is, let alone what he's doing on a spaceship in space with dead bodies around him. He has no idea what's going on. So that's interesting. And you learn what's going on. And you're going back and forth between the timelines of him being on the ship and in space and trying to survive versus what happened on Earth to get him to that point. And you guys, I'm telling you, this book has one of my favorite characters of all time. You guys, I can't even. This is another one where the audiobook would really do you a favor because there's an aspect of this book that is so good on audio, and it's not going to be the same reading it in print. So I'll say that. But one of the best books I've ever read. I absolutely loved it. And then another one is kind of a very popular one as well. But if you have a reader who likes science fiction who hasn't read this book yet, I would recommend Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I really would. And it's a very popular choice. It was a very, very big book when it came out. For a reason, though. Like, it was phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. This one follows a man who is actually comes into a situation where he's discovering that there's parallel universes. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say. And you're seeing different parallel universes of his life, and how he's figuring out how this happened. How am I going to get back to where I need to be? Where do I need to be? It's a whole thing. So it was fantastic. I flew through that book as well. Again, science right over my head. Didn't care. Did not stop my enjoyment at all of his book. And yeah, I don't know. Those are definitely two of my favorites. And I know that they're big, popular releases, so I don't know how helpful that's going to be for science fiction. So, but I absolutely love them. Okay, let's do some middle grade. So let's say you have an adult in your life who likes to read middle grade books and they haven't read these yet, or a child who reads middle grade in your life who hasn't read these yet. The first one I would like to recommend is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. I absolutely adored this book last year. It was in my top 10 of favorites of last year. And we are following a young girl named Amari, and her brother has gone missing, her older brother, and no one knows where he is. So they are trying to figure it out. She ends up getting a cryptic box sent to her house, and in it, she figures out where she needs to go in order to figure out where her brother is. It's a whole secret thing. It's a whole secret society. She had no idea that this was a thing. And she ends up getting actually invited to go to this place and to try out to be investigator of supernatural beings. Guys. So she had no idea this was a thing, that there were supernatural beings out there that needed to be investigated. So she gets invited to go, and she ends up going and finds out that her brother actually worked at this place, and he was a very highly respected and sought after investigator. And she had no idea that this was part of his life. So she has made the decision that she is going to not only get into this training academy, but she's going to find out what happened to her brother. And so in this first book, you see her going through all the steps to get into this place. You see some of the friendships that she makes, some of the enemies that she makes. And it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I loved Amari as a character. I thought she was so great. And book number 2 is already out as well. So you could give the first and second book out. Number 2 came out earlier this year, and I'm excited to read it. I haven't read it yet, but definitely Amari and the Night Brothers. I would also like to recommend the Keeper of the Lost Cities series by Shannon Messenger. Book number 9 just came out, and I believe there's supposed to be 10 books total in the series. So there will be one more coming out, but number 9 just came out. And this series is so much fun. It follows a young girl named Sophie, and Sophie learns that she is an elf. And that's explaining a lot of things for her. And she ends up going to the elven world to figure out about her parents, because she doesn't know them, and to go to this school that she never knew about, but it is somewhere that she belongs for sure. And so she's kind of being inserted into this world that she's supposed to be a part of, but she's going in as a young girl. And yeah, so just things pursue from there. So she's finding things out about herself, about her family, about her legacy, about all sorts of things in this brand new world that she has, just recently discovered. And I thought, especially in the first book, I thought that everything that happened on Earth made a lot of sense before she went into this elven world. Like, it just, I don't know, it just made sense to me. It wasn't just like she was plucked and then put in here. Like, there were steps that were taken. There was a process. It was a whole thing. So I thought that was really great. And the characters are so much fun. The magic is so much fun. And I'm definitely excited to get back to this series. I have only read the first book, but my daughter Layla is currently reading the first book, and she's obsessed. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to really get into that series. And again, there's 9 books out. So a lot there for a reader who wants to kind of get into a big, long series. It's a great one. Okay. And now I'd like to talk about a couple of romance recommendations. So 2 of my favorites. Again, these are very popular, but I mean, they're popular for a reason. So the first one is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I adore Emily Henry's romance books. I am just absolutely loving them. They are just full of banter that I can't get enough of. They are so funny, and I really enjoy them. Beach Read has been my favorite of hers, but this one follows a woman who is an author, and she is definitely in a writing slump. She's having some things going on with her family that is really causing her to just kind of be in a funk. And she's also under a deadline because, of course, right? So she writes romance novels, and she's just really in a funk and doesn't know what to do. So she ends up going to a lake house and deciding, this is where I need to be right now. I just need to be away from everybody and everything and just concentrate on my writing. Well, lo and behold, one night she looks over to the house next door and sees somebody that she knows in there. And it's a rival of hers, and she hates him. He's also a writer. He writes more literary fiction, if you will, that tend to have some darker themes. So they aren't competition to each other as far as what they write, but they're just competition to each other just in general, and have never really gotten along. And he's also there because he is also in a writing slump and is on a deadline. So they have the same idea to go to this place, and they just happen to be next door to each other. And from there, they just start talking, and they end up making this deal because neither one of them can get out of their funk, and they decide to help each other. So let's do an experiment and change it up a little bit, and let's write in each other's genres and see if that can help spark anything. And oh boy, did it. So that's all I'm going to say. Again, the banter in here is fantastic. I absolutely loved it. And that's been like one of my favorites. And last but definitely not least, another book that's going to be in my top favorites of this year, and that is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is her most recent release, and I am obsessed with it. I really am. This follows a woman who is an ER doctor, and she is part of this hospital that her family kind of owns. And so she's kind of a big deal, but she doesn't want as much pressure as her family is put under. So that's why she's kind of just trying to stay in her lane and do her job and just, be there. And then we follow a man who lives in a small town, and he is running a bed and breakfast and just kind of living his life by his own beat, and doesn't really matter. They end up having a chance encounter, and things happen from there. And it's all about, can we make this work? Is there something to make work? There is an age gap. She is 10 years older than he is. Is that a factor? And, they live a couple hours apart. So it's not like they don't live next door to each other by any means. They live in completely different cities. So, is this something that we should actually try to work on, or is it something that we should just have fun every once in a while? So it goes through a whole bunch of different things. And then you're following both of them in their own cities and like what's happening with each of them as well as when they're together. So I loved it. The banter in here, again, like I have a thing for banter. If there's good banter, I am in. And hers was phenomenal. There were scenes where I was texting my friend Amanda because I knew she had read it. And we were just like, oh my God, it's just so funny. And it's so good. It's so, so good. So if you have someone who really loves like funny romances and they have not read Abby Jimenez yet, definitely pick up Part of Your World for them. Okay, guys, that is it. Those are some of my personal favorites that I like to recommend to other people if people are looking for recommendations. And I know that a lot of them are pretty popular choices, but I love them. So, what else are you going to do? So please let me know down below if you guys have any other recommendations for these genres. That would be great down below too. That way, if some of these don't work out for you, maybe someone in the comments can help you out if you're looking for a gift for a book lover in your life. So I hope that these are helpful. Please let me know if you have any thoughts or questions, and I will see you guys again soon. Hope you have a great day. Bye.